We've got 2 sessions for you to close the day here on the main stage. In a moment, we're going to hear from Julian Artopé, who's the director of Ringier Africa in Kenya. And then we're going to finish with a piece on video and the power of live from Rowan Barnett at Twitter. So do take your seats if you're doing so. And if you're coming from other areas of the conference, do move as quickly as you can. Okay, we're used to the idea that in developed economies, we had a line that ran from desktop computing to mobile. But in lots of developing economies, that era of copper wires and landlines was completely bypassed, and everything happens on mobile. From transactions and banking to information, all sorts of commerce happens in the mobile environment. And here to tell us quite a bit more about the opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa is the director of Ringier Africa, Julian Artopé. Julian.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about Africa. Let's talk about the opportunities on the continent and specifically about what a small Swiss company actually wants to do on the world's largest continent. So we are Ringier. We are a 200-year-old family-owned company. And ever since the beginning, it all started with a small printing press. And we nearly missed everything digital. So if you look here, we were a little bit late to the party when it comes to digital revenue. And just within the last 3-4 years, the company and the family specifically invested about 1.5 times of its annual turnover into digitizing the company and into massively ramp up revenue. So over 40% of our annual revenue is coming nowadays from digital, and over 65% of our EBITDA is coming from digital. And I can already preempt that in Africa, we only do digital operations. So you might ask yourself, what is a Swiss company doing in Africa? And that story goes back to 1989. The company back then was flush with cash, no dividends to pay. And we wanted to expand. And Switzerland is a very small country within Europe, so going to Germany or going to Italy or France in a big way was not so easy. And so the legend has it that when the Iron Curtain fell, one of our managers was sent with a suitcase with 50,000 Swiss francs over the border into Eastern Europe to establish the free press in Eastern Europe. And nowadays, that's a 600 million euro revenue operation together with our great partner, Axel Springer, in a 50-50 joint venture that we're very happy with. And so we said, okay, we want to kind of repeat this venture and went in the 90s into Asia. And whereas in Eastern Europe, we really went with a mass market approach. We said we want to build the biggest newspapers, mass reach products. In Asia, we very quickly saw that due to regulation and due to the existing environment there, this is not so easy to replicate. So what we did there is we went more into special interest segments that are nevertheless highly profitable for us. So in Asia, we have the largest in-flight magazine in China. We have a huge women's network, which has everything from beauty tips to the franchise for Elle Women's Magazine, to a marriage website. Really high customer lifetime values in fairly niche segments. And what really unites both of these international expansion is the strategy to say we go in early, we go in with a long-term perspective, but we need to be able to take a number one position and kind of defend this number one position. And this is also what eventually informed our expansion into Africa. So you might have heard a lot of hype around the continent. And when we thought first about Africa, we first of all excluded Northern Africa because we said from a cultural perspective, it's a bit, or it's completely different than the rest of the continent. It's not the same kind of language than the rest of the continent. And back then in 2011, 2012, you also had the Arab Spring, which didn't really help to make the next years easy to predict. And so we also excluded South Africa from the equation because, again, we said we want to be able to go in early, take a number one position. And in South Africa, we would have neither been early in 2011, and the competition is quite high there as well. So we said, okay, we're going to stay clear of that market as well. We had selected 9 markets. Nowadays, we are already active in 7 of those, and we expect to expand into the other 2 in the coming years. And this shows quite well the situation in Africa, because just in terms of the land mass, these 9 markets are as big as Europe is. In terms of the population, they are also nearly as big as the European Union, the largest economic zone in the world. And by 2050, this kind of population will have doubled. But of course, if you look at the current GDP, then you see that Africa is starting at a fairly low level. However, we have very, very strong growth rates. And this kind of study that you see there, that's what's always quoted when you talk about Africa. It's this McKinsey study about the emerging middle class. And if you look at any African capital now versus 4 years ago when we started our operations, it has massively changed. You have many more roads, you have shopping malls coming up, you have small houses demolished and big high-rises, traffic has doubled, you really have a very, very strong development of urbanization and of more people having more disposable income. However, it's also important to mention that if we look at the total or the absolute amount of disposable income here, we're still starting from a small level. So here, according to the McKinsey study, the emerging consumers are households that earn 5,000 to 10,000 USD per year. And that's actually pretty okay if you're in the business of selling soup cubes and you're muggy. But if you're BMW and you want to sell new cars, then you better have to have a look at what is the actual absolute size of the consumers in the markets in Africa. And the second part is that this kind of growth that is currently happening in Africa is pretty strong. So we're having in these kind of markets between 5 to 7% compounded annual growth rates over the next couple of years. But it's also important to mention this is not Asia in the mid-2000s. And the kind of growth that we currently see in Africa is still fairly linear. However, there's a development which is exponential and where you have this kind of hockey stick and which is currently changing the market